I think that he was starting to realize that maybe I was catching on, because I got a call from him. And I kid you not, he asked me about 8 times, "What do you know?" And I said, "Mr. Jackson, I don't know what you want me to tell you."
Behind the closed doors of celebrity kingdoms, the people who clean up the glitter see everything. The public only guessed at the dark reality of Neverland Ranch. But when a former personal maid stepped in front of the cameras for a definitive, chilling interview, the global narrative broke completely. Before she disappeared in the frame, her raw, unscripted testimony exposed secrets the king of pop spent millions trying to bury forever. What happens when the quietest voice in the house finally unloads the truth? The eyewitness pressure. Imagine landing a job at the most magical estate on Earth. In the early 90s, Adrienne McManus was hired as a personal maid at Neverland Valley Ranch. For a regular working-class woman in Santa Barbara County, it felt like winning a literal golden ticket. She wasn't just cleaning a standard celebrity mansion, she was entering an absolute playground. On her first days, she walked past roaming exotic animals, heard the music from a private amusement park floating through the hills, and smelled the fresh popcorn coming from a custom-built movie theater. It was a surreal, dazzling fairy tale. To Adrienne, Michael Jackson wasn't just a global superstar, he was a generous, soft-spoken boss who seemed to want nothing more than to spread joy to the world. But when you are hired to clean the inner sanctum of a kingdom, the illusion wears off remarkably fast. Why? Adrienne's primary duty was maintaining the main house, which included Michael's highly private, multi-level master bedroom suite. This wasn't a normal bedroom. It was a heavily fortified fortress within the mansion, complete with hidden doors, private staircases, and intricate security alarms designed to alert the singer if anyone was approaching. At first, Adrienne kept her head down and focused on the vacuuming and dusting, but as the weeks rolled into months, she began to notice a bizarre, deeply unsettling pattern that completely shattered the whimsical Peter Pan image. The first thing that tripped her up was the utter lack of adult boundaries. Neverland was constantly flooded with young boys, but they weren't just visiting the amusement park, they were deeply embedded in Michael's private quarters. Adrienne started finding children's clothing scattered all over the master bedroom floor. She would walk in to tidy up and find young boys sleeping in Michael's bed while the singer was present. In any normal household, this would instantly trigger massive red flags. But inside the vacuum of Neverland, the staff was conditioned to believe everything was completely innocent. Michael was just a big kid who loved sleepovers, right? That was the company line everyone repeated, but the physical evidence Adrienne had to clean up told a wildly different story. As she emptied the trash cans and changed the linens, she began finding things that made her stomach turn. There were empty wine bottles disguised as regular soda cans, a setup the staff eventually nicknamed Jesus Juice. She found explicit adult magazines left out on the tables and floors, right where the young boys were playing. Even more alarming, she noticed a strange, highly manipulative power dynamic. Michael would lavish these kids with thousands of dollars in video games, toys, and expensive clothes, effectively making himself the center of their universe, while cutting them off from their own family's supervision. Whenever Adrienne entered a room where Michael was hanging out with a child, the atmosphere would instantly shift. The laughter would stop and a heavy, tense silence would fill the air. She began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. She realized she wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an accidental eyewitness to a highly secretive, deeply unconventional lifestyle. The whimsical wonderland she had been so excited to work at now felt like a beautifully gilded trap. She was trapped in a psychological pressure cooker, terrified of what she was seeing, but even more terrified of what would happen if she spoke up. What happens when a low-wage worker realizes her billionaire boss is hiding a dark secret, and she is the only one holding the keys? The non-disclosure agreement. The tipping point arrived when the physical evidence Adrienne found shifted from merely eccentric to deeply disturbing. It was one thing to find kids' pajamas scattered on a bedroom floor, but it was an entirely different reality to clean up after what she alleged were active encounters. In her explosive 60 Minutes Australia interview, Adrienne laid out the stomach-turning details of what she claimed to have witnessed while tending to Michael's private suite. She described walking into rooms and finding young boys visibly disoriented, distressed, or completely nude in the singer's presence. When she went to change the bed sheets, she frequently encountered fluids and stains that left no doubt in her mind that adult boundaries had been totally obliterated. Perhaps the most chilling detail Adrienne exposed was the sheer calculated nature of the grooming process. She watched firsthand as Jackson utilized his unimaginable wealth to systematically dismantle a child's defenses. It always started exactly the same way. A new, vulnerable boy would arrive at Neverland, usually from a modest background. Within days, Michael would completely overwhelm the kid with gifts, clothing, and undivided attention. Adrian recalled seeing the singer whisper into the boy's ears, constantly reinforcing the idea that the rest of the world, including the boy's own parents, didn't truly understand them. Only Michael did. Then came the introduction of the infamous Jesus juice. Adrian testified that Jackson would routinely pour high-end wine into regular innocent-looking soda cans or juice boxes. To the outside world, or to a parent glancing into the room, it just looked like a superstar sharing a casual snack with a young fan. But Adrian knew exactly what was happening. The alcohol was being used to lower the children's inhibitions, making them compliant and relaxed within the isolating walls of the master fortress. It was a highly effective, deeply manipulative strategy that kept the kids dependent on Michael's approval. But if Adrian saw all of this in the early 90s, why didn't she immediately run to the police? The answer lies in the terrifying legal and psychological machine that protected the king of pop. Neverland wasn't just a home, it was a corporate surveillance state. Every single employee was forced to sign incredibly strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The staff knew that a single leak to the media or the authorities would result in a massive, ruinous lawsuit that would destroy their lives financially. Adrian felt completely isolated. She was a working-class woman pitted against a global icon backed by a multi-million-dollar legal army. Worse than the legal threats was the psychological intimidation. Adrian claimed that Jackson's top security personnel kept a hyper-vigilant eye on the domestic staff. She felt watched, followed, and constantly monitored. She believed that if she stepped out of line, her safety and the safety of her family would be put in serious jeopardy. So she did what most people in her position would do. She stayed quiet, kept her head down, and buried the trauma deep inside her mind. She eventually left her job at Neverland in 1994, right as the Jordan Chandler scandal was exploding, carrying a mountain of radioactive secrets that would haunt her for the next decade. But secrets have a funny way of clawing their way to the surface, especially when the law finally forces you to look your demons in the eye. Day 48, the Battle of Credibility in 2005. When the law finally caught up with Neverland Ranch in the mid-2000s, Adrian McManus was pulled directly out of her quiet life and thrust into the blinding spotlight of the Santa Maria courtroom. It was day 48 of the 2005 criminal trial when the prosecution called her to the stand. For the district attorney, Adrian was supposed to be their ultimate insider weapon. She wasn't an outsider looking in, she was the woman who had physically held the keys to the master suite. The prosecution wanted her to paint the definitive portrait of Neverland as a calculating grooming ground, validating the horrific experiences of the young accusers. But taking the stand against Michael Jackson meant facing his legendary, hyper-aggressive lead defense attorney, Tom Mesereau. What followed was a brutal, multi-hour cross-examination that turned into an absolute bloodbath of credibility. Mesereau didn't just question Adrian, he systematically dismantled her piece by piece in front of the jury. He focused heavily on a glaring, undeniable fact. Before she became a witness for the state, Adrian had actively tried to shop her story to tabloid magazines, television networks, and book publishers for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mesereau hammered this point ruthlessly. He looked the jury in the eye and framed Adrian not as a brave whistleblower seeking justice, but as a disgruntled, cash-strapped former employee who was weaponizing sensationalized lies to secure a massive media payday. He brought out past depositions and legal documents, highlighting massive inconsistencies in her timeline. He pointed out that during earlier investigations in the 90s, Adrian had told police officers under oath that she had never seen anything inappropriate happen at the ranch. On the stand, Adrian was forced to make a devastating admission. She had lied under oath in the past. She tried to explain to the courtroom that her previous silence and denials were fueled entirely by intense terror, that Jackson's security team had threatened her life, and she was genuinely scared for her safety. But in a court of law, once a witness admits they have lied under oath before, their credibility takes a catastrophic hit. Mesereau capitalized on this, mocking her claims of being intimidated and painting her as completely untrustworthy. The intense courtroom drama completely split the jury and the millions of people watching the nightly news recaps. To Jackson's fierce loyalists, Day 48 was a massive victory. They saw Adrian's breakdown on the stand as absolute proof that the entire case against the pop star was a fabricated extortion plot cooked up by greedy opportunists. But to seasoned legal analysts and child advocacy experts, her erratic testimony was a classic textbook symptom of a traumatized whistleblower who had been thoroughly broken by a multi-million-dollar intimidation machine. Ultimately, her shattered credibility contributed heavily to Jackson's sweeping acquittal on all counts. He walked out of the courthouse free, leaving Adrian to retreat back into the shadows, branded by the world as a certified liar. But when a global icon dies and the legal threats finally evaporate, who gets the last word in the court of public opinion? The cost of speaking up. The fallout from the 2005 trial absolutely devastated Adrian McManus. While Michael Jackson celebrated his total acquittal, Adrian returned to her life carrying a massive, radioactive stigma. She wasn't just a regular citizen anymore. She was widely branded as the woman who tried to take down the king of pop for a quick buck. Jackson's fiercely protective global fan base turned her life into a living hell. She received non-stop death threats, was aggressively harassed in public, and found herself completely blacklisted from any respectable domestic work. Speaking out hadn't made her rich. It had made her a social pariah, broken her finances, and left her looking over her shoulder for years. For over a decade, Adrian retreated completely from the public eye, burying her head in the sand while the world moved on. Even after Michael Jackson tragically passed away in 2009, she remained terrified of his massive estate and the army of lawyers who fiercely guarded his billion-dollar legacy. But as time passed, the cultural landscape began to shift. The rise of accountability movements and the sudden wave of new high-profile accusers speaking out proved that the public was finally willing to listen to the darker side of the Neverland story, without immediately dismissing it. The ultimate turning point arrived when 60 Minutes Australia flew a production crew to the United States to sit down with Adrian for what would become the most raw, definitive interview of her entire life. Titled, Michael Jackson, What the Maid Saw, the intense investigative special gave Adrian something she had never truly had in the 2005 Santa Maria courtroom: the freedom to tell her complete story from start to finish without a hyper-aggressive defense lawyer cutting her off. On camera, Adrian looked visibly older, heavily weathered by decades of carrying these secrets, but her voice carried a profound, unshakable weight. She walked the Australian journalist step by step through the layout of Neverland, describing the exact mechanics of how Jackson allegedly operated behind closed doors. Free from the immediate terror of legal retaliation, she dropped bombshell after bombshell, detailing the specific moments she claimed to have witnessed the singer manipulating vulnerable children. She openly addressed her past courtroom failures, looking straight into the lens to explain how the sheer panic of facing Jackson's massive machine had completely derailed her testimony. The global impact of that Australian special was immediate and explosive. Stripped of the sensationalized, circus-like atmosphere of the American tabloids, the documentary presented Adrian's claims with a chilling, clinical seriousness. For millions of viewers worldwide, seeing this older, unassuming woman sit in a quiet room and break down in tears over what she had to clean up 30 years prior was a massive wake-up call. It completely bypassed the standard Hollywood PR filters and forced a modern audience to confront a deeply unsettling reality. Adrian wasn't chasing a payout anymore. She was an aging woman desperately trying to clear her conscience before her time ran out. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content just like this.